The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Austin Community College or the art galleries at Austin Community College.
Welcome to the limited podcast series that features the artists in the American Roulette Collective. The work of these artists are currently featured in the exhibition American Roulette, Navigating Gun Culture in Our Violent Society, which is being held at the art galleries at Austin Community College, on view from February 25th to June 26th on ACC's Highland campus. My name is Dr. Inayatpour, and at the time of recording, I was an intern with the galleries at Austin Community College. Currently, I'm a UT student studying art history. I did these interviews last summer over the course of a couple of months leading up to this exhibition in order to supplement and add more context and nuance to the content being seen and visualized in the exhibition itself. This is a 4-part series on 4 of the 7 artists who constitute the collective. I'll be talking with Dominic Sansoni, an artist from the Chicago area who is one of the co-founders of the Artist Collective.
When I'm in conversations, I try to be very careful about the words I choose. I refer to them as firearms, not guns. It's little things like that. I never use the word assault rifle because I don't want to get into semantic gotcha games.
Michelle Graves, a research-based Las Vegas artist who joined the collective in 2021.
Imagine the moment where a life ceased to exist. So that frozen moment, being in a situation, I had never shot a gun before myself.
Yusuf Del Valle, a sculpture and 3D design professor at ACC.
We're all doing work on different fronts of gun violence. So my work focuses on mass shootings.
And Cesar Conde, a Chicago-based artist who creates large-scale paintings and drawings that highlight social justice issues.
To create that sort of destruction, it'll be a town. It'll be really interesting, and I hope that this senseless killings of innocent children ends. But powers that be, that we don't have it.
The art galleries at Austin Community College partnered with the American Roulette Collective and began planning the exhibition in 2023. The Artist Collective mission statement reads as follows. The mission of this exhibit is to evoke a needed platform for productive dialogue across cultural and societal divides in order to listen and learn from each other. Violence and disregard for life have become so ingrained in American society and culture, from police brutality and institutional abuse to poverty and domestic violence, that our collective consciousness is now being shaped by paranoia and fear. The media we choose to consume numbs us, and the suffering endured by others becomes nothing more than flickering images on a screen, slowly turning our desensitization to apathy and fascination. The American Roulette exhibit presents provocative artwork influenced by gun culture and violence that comments on different aspects through the unique approaches of each artist. This episode of the American Roulette podcast will feature Michelle Graves, a research-based Las Vegas artist who joined the collective in 2021. Her work freezes the silent moment between chaos and the ending of a conscious life. Hi, Michelle. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and your artistic practice.
My name is Michelle Graves, and my artwork is mainly based in research. And the research that I collect is just historical data. And then some of my bodies of work, I have multiple bodies of work, and some of them include physiology, like how the human anatomy works, or all the way down to quantum physics. This particular piece, if I go into that immediately, was a commission piece. And there's basically somebody curating a show in 2019. And it was about gun violence. She selected 7 artists to make artwork about gun violence, and each artist had a particular topic. And I was given the topic gun violence in schools. And I almost didn't take the commission. I didn't have any personal experience with gun violence in schools. My artwork didn't really entail gun violence at that time. So I spoke with them. One person I knew from grad school that was on the board told me that I was really good at displaying artwork and coming to a conclusion with questions, with being very diplomatic and not preaching any sort of side about a topic. It was just presenting information. I took that on as a challenge and I said, okay. And I started doing research about gun violence in schools and I couldn't find any data. Okay, what are the top 5 guns used in school shootings out there? I started the project in 2018. And I found out that there was an amendment passed in 1996 called the Dickey Amendment that basically states that there can be no public research on gun control, because the CDC started doing research about gun violence in that time. And they published a paper and they basically came out with the statement saying that there's more likely for gun violence to happen when there is a household gun in a home situation. So the NRA came along and they were like, this is about gun control. The CDC was like, well, this is about gun violence. So it was really a matter of semantics, like just that simple word difference. But the NRA won, and the CDC was defunded $2.6 million that was being public health research on gun violence, not gun control. So there was basically no public health research on gun violence 1996 until 2018. That money, $2.6 million, went towards brain injury. So around that time in the early 2000s, they started doing research on concussions, a lot more research on Alzheimer's. The reason why there was a lot more publications on that was because it was funded. So imagine we had public health research on gun violence since 1996. That was already started. What difference there could have been knowledge-wise about why gun violence happens, and down to potentially the root of why gun violence happens. So the only reason why it was reassessed, the 1996 Dickey Amendment, was the Parkland, Florida school shooting. Even though it wasn't the most significant, the reason why it became significant, it wasn't the most massive, but the reason why it became significant is because the students rallied like 2 weeks after school shooting, and they got 888 schools around the world to rally on the same day. That was when the United States actually was like, okay, that caught their attention. So it took the students rallying to basically initiate a change where the United States government reassessed the Dickey Amendment. And they did a public statement that it was semantics. The Dickey Amendment is still in place, but the CDC is allowed to do public health research on gun violence, but specifically state this is not about gun control. So all that research, I was like, okay, what do I do with this? Because it was 2018 when I started making the work, and there was no data at that point. The work, this takes me back to my practice, is that I like to break things down. I like to understand why things happen, like how things work and why things happen. And in that research, since there was no data, I had to imagine the moment where a life ceased to exist. So that frozen moment, being in a situation, I had never shot a gun before myself. So I was like, well, okay, I need to shoot a gun to understand and to embody the power in that situation. And then I'm very into anatomy. So I really imagined shooting through flesh, which becomes pretty intense as far as like that display. But what I did was I purchased some pig hearts at the local grocery in Chicago. I was living in Chicago at the time, and $1 a piece. My sister lives in West Indiana, and my brother-in-law owns 7 guns, and they have like 10 acres of land near Forest Preserve. So I made 5 by 5 foot canvases, and I decided to shoot through pig hearts onto canvas. So I put the pig hearts in a bag with red acrylic paint and food coloring and kind of made a little mini balloon, and then shot through the pig heart onto canvas with 5 different guns. And those pieces are what became the installation. The canvases hang on the wall. There's bullet holes in them and splatter of red, and I encase the hearts in resin, and they suspend in front of the piece. So, and the pieces titled are named after the guns. Like I used a Glock, which is a handgun with a 9mm bullet. I used a Benelli 22, which is a 22mm shotgun. That's how that work came about. lack of data, embodying the moment, and using anatomy as representation of a consciousness.
How did you decide to become an artist?
Well, I've been making art my entire life. When I was 5 years old, they ask you what you want to be. I said artist, and I pursued it the entire time. So art to me is a way of processing things, like how I understand the world. I was kind of always a maker, and then in undergrad, I got my undergrad in photography at Indiana University, finished in 2003. And in that BFA thesis, I found the formula in a way, which was kind of researching perspective, like my personal perspective in comparison to perspective onto me and me as in a general self. And when they become similar, then I use the term real for a lack of a better word, but the more real one can be. Like the self-perception and the perception on the self, the closer they are to being the same, the more real a person could be. I got really into existentialism philosophy. There's like positive and negative, essentially, and a dichotomy in a way. And having one makes one understand the other a little more if you are facing both. And I think that in that formula, it got me a little bit more deep into anatomy and how physiology works and heartbreak and thinking of like memory, and then but also the physical world around it. So it kind of sent me in this trajectory in two ways. Physiology, when you have a broken heart, when you go through tragedy, there is a syndrome called TACO, pseudocardiomyopathy. So when you go through something traumatic, it sends troponins to your heart, but it paralyzes the left ventricle of your heart, which causes blood to fill in that ventricle. So that's why you physically have a heavy feeling and you feel your arms a little bit numb when you go through something traumatic because your heart is temporarily paralyzed. So I was kind of obsessed with the anatomical heart and what that represents and how the heart can represent a consciousness or a human. And that after undergrad, I really pursued anatomy and then physiology and then things surrounding a piece of the body. So the heart, brain, lungs, and what all that means philosophically and why we exist. And then a lot of tangents around that. And also researching physiology, you can get down to the human cell, but it goes further. It goes down to the quantum level into the unknown. And another example is my master's thesis, which I got from Columbia College in Chicago. My master's is in interdisciplinary arts and media. Undergrad, like kind of the heart as representative of the human or consciousness and the self. Between undergrad and grad school, I did a lot of research on the brain. My grandmother was dying of Alzheimer's, so the hippocampus, memory, emotion. And grad school was about the lungs, breathing. Breathing is the only semi-controllable essential bodily function, which is kind of the intersection of consciousness and poetry in a way. When you think about breath, it's hard to not think of your own. So what does that mean? That's like this intersection of consciousness and science. So what in that space between when there's an unknown, like reasons why, there's a plethora of space to explore in that unknown, like why. And I'm like not running out of questions of why. That's kind of my path, like how I've gotten from lighter artwork where I don't feel like I have to do research, but I do like to do anatomical drawings, like research on the actual functioning of the human body, to botany, plants, the root system, how things interact with one another, to quantum physics and why and how.
How did you get involved with American Roulette?
I lived in Chicago at the time, went to a gallery opening of a friend, CJ Hungerman, who was also part of the collective. In that gallery opening, I met Dominic and we were just talking, chatting it up. He was like, "What do you do?" and I just finished the project. And so I described to him that I just made a body of work that's about gun violence and described the work. And he was like, you need to be a part of American Roulette. So the work wasn't copyrighted by this collective that I was a part of. It was through an organization in Columbus, Ohio called Spaces. It was called America's Well-Armed Militias. So that was the original. So I just described the work to him, and the work had already been in New York City, and they were trying to show it in Chicago, and got involved with them. And then the pandemic happened, and I ran a gallery in Chicago at the time also. So we were kind of closed doors. Black Lives Matter was going on as well. And a giant march rolled up the street on Ashland Avenue near Division. We were a volunteer station for water for people if anybody needed, and a restroom. And we were about to close the doors, and somebody walked in, and I was like, who are you? And he was the director of the Epiphany Center in Chicago. And that was originally the place that Cesar had applied to display American Roulette. And in that meeting, I knew of him, and I said, oh, we applied to exhibit at your space right before the pandemic happened. And he said, apply again. We did. And we ended up having an exhibit there in June 2021. I was really involved in the art scene, always kind of going to gallery openings, knew CJ already, met Dominic. It was kind of serendipitous that I ran into the director of the Epiphany Center.
What is it that you hope to gain from creating different methods of interacting with your art?
I do like to contain the research somehow. I do a lot when I dig into deeper concepts. The research I want to present sometimes, but it doesn't always come out obviously in the work itself. So a zine is a really great way to contain that research. Like I wanted to turn in a zine for my dissertation for grad school type of thing. I did a interactive piece where you like breathe through a microphone, but I made it kind of abstract. The level of sound that it picked up, I did this interactive software called Isadora, where I converted the level of audio that's picked up by blowing into a microphone into an integer. And that integer triggered a video that projected text moving across a wall onto a big mural of writing. And then that text, calm within a chaos, take a deep breath, from physiological to more philosophical. And then it hovered over the mural and turned into a spotlight of that text, and you could read around it for more context.
What's the idea between having the zine and the installation, or video and text and all this different medium? How do you feel like that enriches your work?
For one, formally, it's a takeaway, but also a way for people to contemplate deeper after they experience the artwork. I really love to write, and I like doing little doodles. So the zine to me is inspired from my childhood. My parents met in a mechanical drawing class in college, and my mother was a freelance person. She drew graphs for chemistry professors at Purdue University, but she would always give me a list of things to do, and she'd always draw little images along with the list. I think that that's such a huge, vivid memory that I like doing that myself in a way. And I think that the zine form is basically a way of containing the information, the research that I do. I think that this is such a different way of using the brain when experiencing artwork, when you have a piece on a wall and you have a poetic, illustrative piece of information to go with it.
How do you approach topics that would not always have an easy answer? How do you create space for dialogue in those kind of situations?
Well, it's a matter of proposing questions and making work that is embodying. So it kind of makes one let go of one side or another. That's where I try to position my artwork, is to be non-biased, nonpartisan. And doing that, especially using the term nonpartisan, I feel like the art space gallery situation, presenting work, people walk into a gallery space being curious about what they're going to experience. And I think that putting something like this body of work in a gallery lends to a platform where people are curious and might lead to a conversation. The conversation is the point in which maybe differencing opinions can start to understand or just listen. Listening to another opinion on a topic can be expansive, not necessarily a change of opinion of one's own opinion, but expansive to hear what their personal experience is and what their opinion is. So I think that American Roulette exhibit is a really great example of using an art space as a platform to encourage dialogue and to encourage listening. Honestly, I didn't know this joining American Roulette, how it would be, how the work would change my perspective. Chicago's a bubble of blue, if I am to speak in a partisan way. So the conversation was kind of anti-gun violence, but moving the artwork to Las Vegas, for example, was expansive for myself. When we travel the artwork, we like to have an open call for artwork so people in that community can make artwork about the topic. And then that encourages the personal community to have a conversation too. So the work in Las Vegas changed my trajectory in what I think about guns and what I personally think about guns. She was held up at gunpoint. She worked at a pawn shop here, born and raised here. Her father's a policeman. She's very familiar with guns. So we did an open call here. That was the first time we did an open call was here in Vegas. So she's held up at gunpoint, arm around the neck, hostage style. The fact that she recognized the gun, the handgun that the perpetrator had, she took a chance and took the gun out of his hand, was able to discharge the bullets and throw them away from each other, and the cops were able to get the perpetrator. So the fact that she was highly educated on guns, she was able to disbar the situation. And so that education part became a really important aspect of guns in general for myself because I needed to learn how to shoot a gun in order to kind of understand. And then like somebody else who already had full knowledge of guns was able to save herself in a situation. So education became this really important thing to me because of fear. There's an unknown there, but it's also a judgment. When you have more knowledge about a topic that causes fear, that fear starts to dissipate in a way. Gun violence is definitely fearful, but knowledge of a gun can potentially dissipate that fear or potential devastation. And so we had a call for art in Colorado. We're going to have a call in Texas. And I think that conversation, since it's so state specific, like it's open carry state here. You can carry a gun in your front pants here, which is wild moving here from Chicago, but it's just another perspective. And being open to perspective helps one be less fearful. My personal mission for the collective is to really open up dialogue.
I'm curious to know if you'll be creating more work on gun violence as part of your own body of work.
The body of work is so specific and like shooting a gun, different types of guns through a pig heart onto canvas. The work itself is very specific. So I haven't done any more of that physical work, but I did update the zine. The last exhibit that we had in Denver, Colorado, I did do second version because the Dickey memo was reassessed. There was been a lot of research on live shooting protocol. So that's what I've updated is the data since it has evolved since 2018. If I'm going to update or make new work, I have not, besides doing the research for gun violence research in itself.
Any final statements that you want to leave?
I think I've said a lot. I would be repeating myself as far as like a last statement, but for the American Roulette exhibit, my mission, I think, and others' missions too that are part of the collective, that this is a non-partisan exhibit. This is not about gun control. This is about the effects of gun violence. And as artists, we're processing those effects and displaying different interpretations of how that is. I think as far as a final statement goes, I like to leave it open-ended because people need to experience it for themselves. We're not trying to persuade opinions. We're displaying reactions to gun violence, and witnessing these reactions is contemplative, and we need to face our fears. And I think facing our fears is a really great way to bring ourselves closer to reality than maybe there can be better realizations in the moment when it comes to something like gun violence.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Special thanks to our host, Dr. and Yatapur, for conducting the interviews. Special thanks to Dominic Saisone, Michelle Graves, Yusuf Del Valle, and Cesar Conde for sharing their stories. This series was edited and produced by Marvin Wigfall and Austin Lara as gallery interns through the radio, TV, and film program at Austin Community College, and co-produced by Peter Bonfido, exhibition curator and gallery director at ACC, as well as RTF professor Christian Raymond. We show much appreciation for everyone at the Tag Art Gallery and everyone on Austin Community College on Highland campus. For more information about this exhibition and other programming by the art galleries at Austin Community College, go to admc.austincc.edu/tag.